The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello everyone, my name is Jillian Schaefer and I'm the Marketing Coordinator for SWK Technologies. I'd like to welcome you to our webinar, 3 Strategies for Optimizing Your Inventory, presented by Russ Graff of Sage Inventory Advisor. A little housekeeping before we get started. Everyone has been placed on mute to keep the background noise down. However, you can submit any questions you have throughout the webinar. To submit a question, look for the questions section in your GoToWebinar. We will answer all questions at the end of the presentation. We are recording this presentation and it will be distributed tomorrow to all attendees as well as to those who registered but were not able to attend. Please take a moment at the end of the presentation to answer our one survey question. With that said, we appreciate you taking time out of your busy day to attend our webinar. We're here to help you get the most out of your software solutions and help you find an easier way to run your business by providing you software and industry knowledge, tools, and support whenever you need it. We've invited Sage Inventory Advisor here today because they are the industry experts on inventory management. So whether you're here doing research for a new solution or you're just here to learn, we'd like to encourage you to ask any questions throughout the webinar. Lastly, as a quick reminder, SWK is constantly sharing important updates and software tips and tricks on our social media channels. So we encourage you to follow us on Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Without further ado, I'll hand it over to Russ.
All right, thanks, Jolene. I appreciate that. And let me show my screen, and you should be seeing our top slide here.
Yep.
All right, very good. Yeah, thanks again. Thanks to SWK for the opportunity, and thanks to all of you in attendance today, or if you're perhaps viewing the recording later, we appreciate you taking some time out of your busy schedules to learn a little bit more about our topic today, which is 3 strategies for optimizing your inventory. Of course, we're coming to you today the day after Election Day, I guess the beginning of what we might call Election Week. So I'm a little bit low on sleep, but hopefully we'll get through this okay. Maybe some of you listening are as well. And of course, this being 2020 and Murphy's Law, Murphy being an optimist, of course, the condominium above mine now is starting to drill into their concrete. So hopefully that's not a distraction for those of you that are listening today. And we'll get through this together. So again, my name is Russ Graff. I'm with a company called NetStock, which is the author of Sage Inventory Advisor. And many of you are probably already familiar, have heard the name. We've been around for quite a while in the Sage space. I've personally been around a long time, 35 years or so, actually one of the predecessor firms to portions of what is now SWK, where I was a business partner for years and have been involved in lots of different implementations and worked with lots of different manufacturers and distributors over the years, working through this process of inventory management and having those kinds of consultative conversations. So hopefully I've got a little bit of history that I can bring to bear. Obviously, we're in this COVID world. Some now are starting to promote topics and content out there in the world talking about post-COVID. I'm not sure if the virus agrees with that, how post we are yet, or how many different spikes or surges we're going to experience before it is behind us. But clearly, we've been dealing with this now since February, March, in terms of supply chains, maybe even January, depending on what products and where you might be buying products in your organization. So it clearly has created a major disruption, right? As we watched early on, especially in March, April, May, when we were going through initial shutdowns of economies and so forth, we were, hearing the phrase supply chain in press conferences and on the news and so forth more than I think we probably had ever heard it in 30 years prior. So we know that we've been through a very unusual period. And talk a little bit more about that, but I think it's good to have a little bit of context around that and understand that it's kind of the nature of supply chains. Obviously, this has been somewhat extreme, but even before the COVID disruption hit, we were already dealing with trade wars and tariffs and some of these battles with China and some other locations around the world that were already upsetting things or disrupting things. But we also always experience, of course, natural disasters as well, unfortunately, whether those be in areas of supply or, if you've been bringing in product through the ports in Houston or New Orleans in the Gulf Coast as a regular process, that we've had 4 and now maybe there's a 5th hurricane bearing down on that same region, right? So it's been an awful year for those environments, those geographies, bringing product in. We also experience labor strikes and political unrest, and unfortunately sometimes terrorist activity and so forth. So it's the nature of the beast, if you will, in the world of supply chain, that there's always disruption. And we even have scheduled things that we can kind of anticipate, things like Chinese New Year, or if we're buying product from Europe, we know that in August much of the of Europe shuts down for holiday and different events like that. So it's a normal part of the game, if you will, in managing supply chains, but clearly this has been an extreme disruption. And what it has done, what we've experienced in talking to our customers and prospects along the way, that it clearly has highlighted some of the potential weaknesses that we have in our systems today to manage those supply chain disruptions. And so, you know, many of you, I'm sure, have been asking yourself, so how have we responded? What did we learn? Were our people ready? Did we have the right processes in place? Was our technology in a position to be able to maybe anticipate some of what was going on and quickly address, be nimble in our response to the disruption and so forth? Again, clearly an extreme example, but it probably can serve to expose where we maybe have some weaknesses in our internal systems and processes. And if we come out of this period without having done that self-assessment and asking yourself those tough questions and hopefully identifying areas of improvement, then we've missed an opportunity. Some of you may have participated in some of the SAGE events earlier this summer. They called it the third-party conference. I think it was STAC was the acronym for it, and Nancy Harris, the GM of SAGE North America, gave a little bit of a keynote, and she talked about not just coming back to what we're all hearing this phrase, probably sick of the phrase new normal. She prefers to think of this as an opportunity for a better normal, right? When we come out of this, we should be better than when we went into it, because we have the opportunity here to learn. And I think that's exactly right. So, you know, so what did that mean for you personally, right, in your organizations? Did it expose any things in terms of how you're managing and accounting for your items, how you're managing and making decisions around replenishment and buying habits, and understanding what those stocking levels need to be? One of the disruptions that we've been experiencing really for the last couple of years in the supply chain environment was the rapidly rising transportation costs and impacts there. And you know, one of the things that we saw as a result of COVID was a huge reduction in transportation options. Transportation companies, shipping firms, and so forth were really cutting back on their capacity, which actually increased, again, accelerated the cost associated and the lack of availability for some of that shipping. So now are we shipping product via air freight at 2 or 3 times the price and so forth? So, you know, have we evaluated what our transportation networks look like? And one of the trends that we know is already in play was because of those transportation cost increases that had been occurring over the last few years, even prior to any tariff or trade war activity between the administrations, was a trend that was slowly gathering some steam, depending on the type of product that it was that was being built, was this concept of nearshoring, or bringing it back to U.S. shores for some of those manufacturing processes. But clearly that's now going to continue to accelerate, right? We're seeing a lot more activity where folks are opening up alternative sources of vendors coming from different locations, maybe coming in through different ports and coming in, being you know, closer to home, if you will, in Central America and South America and so forth. So so there's lots going on there that we can be thinking about and asking those questions about. And then so how does that impact me, right? How is my SAGE ERP, how are my other associated systems helping me address those issues? And when we talk to firms, which we do every single day, we've now got over 1,600 companies around the globe. We are a global company. Over 1,600 firms are using this application every single day to help them make these purchasing decisions and so forth, and help them manage and give visibility to their inventory. So as we talk with those firms and those customers and prospects, obviously everybody's got some sort of an accounting ERP application. In this audience, of course, those are SAGE ERPs, whether that's SAGE 100 or 500 or X3, whatever it might be. And a wealth of information captured there, right? Great transactional information that's capturing all the movement and ins and outs and transactions that are going on, reflecting and impacting impacting inventory. Then we see, of course, the use of third-party products in different aspects. Certainly warehouse management solutions are a common one, where we're managing the physical movement of the inventory, pick, pack, ship, and shipping automation tools, EDI, and so forth. So there's typically an ecosystem of third-party products that bolt onto the ERP that assist in our supply chain activities. And then we also see Excel spreadsheets being pretty prevalent, whether it's for financial budgeting and analysis, sales reporting, or in some cases inventory tracking and analysis as well. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. If you've seen some of our presentations in the past, you know that we like to make one key point of difference here, and that's between inventory control and inventory replenishment. A lot of times we hear the phrase inventory management and think of it as, you know, kind of a specific phrase or meaning. But what it really is, it has two components to it, two pieces to it. What we often think of is really just the one component, which is I would really more appropriately call inventory control. It's managing the physical product and the ins and outs and the movement of that product, whether it's receiving or, again, pick, pack, ship, hopefully doing physical counts, maybe cycle counting some of the more important items, right, to make sure that I've got accurate understanding of what I've got and where it is, how much I have, so forth, especially if I have multiple locations or bins within my warehouse locations. And then that's where we see warehouse management tools and barcoding and handheld devices and so forth really assisting with the very accurate and timely capture of those transactions, right? So now I've got a really good feel for what I have and where I have it, so forth. So that's one key aspect. Sometimes that's as far as our thinking goes. We don't realize there's a flip side to the coin. There's another aspect of inventory management that I would call inventory replenishment, might be referred to as inventory optimization, demand planning, and forecasting, a couple of different terms that relate to this other aspect of management, which is understanding, now that I know what I have, is it the right stuff? Do I have the right level of product at the right place at the right time to meet my customer demands or my manufacturing facilities demands, right, depending on my environment? And am I leveraging the technologies that are available to me to understand what that future demand looks like, how to place efficient and accurate, smart orders, and do I really understand what needs my attention? Where do I need to focus my energies to solve a problem or get ahead of it, even better, right? Prevent the problem from occurring so that I can stay ahead of the curve there. So those two together really create that full inventory management solution. And sometimes we miss the fact that this inventory replenish component is available to us, and that there's a better way to do that than what we're doing today. And you know, I think it's useful to think about what are the problems that occur if we don't optimize our inventory, if we haven't done a good job of managing all these different aspects. What's the impact of that on my business? And so we'd like to think of three things that we talked about specifically. There's probably a fourth one that I'll mention as well. But clearly the worst thing that can happen to our organizations is that we run out of product. Right? If I'm a manufacturing environment, running out of product means maybe slowing down or stopping a production line, which is extremely expensive, right? Especially if it's for the lack of some raw material or component that I could have easily had in inventory. But more commonly, from a distribution environment, I've got an order from a customer, or in a retail environment, I've got an order from a customer that I can't fill because I'm out of stock of some item for some period of time. And in today's world, in the world of Amazon-driven expectations that we all as consumers now have, that's been bleeding into the business-to-business environment, right? And the loyalty's just not there. And if I've got a product that can be found somewhere else easily on the web and I can purchase it from a competitor, I'm going to do that. And if I have a great experience there, that may become a habit, right? I may lose not just that sale, but that customer altogether. So a terrible outcome as a result of running out of inventory. But I can't solve that problem simply by overbuying, by having excess stock and warehouses overflowing with inventory and product, because that has its own implications and costs, right? First of all, it's tying up cash. And we all know, especially in the small, medium-sized businesses, cash flow is king, right? Managing that cash is critical, and we simply cannot afford to have it sitting on the warehouse shelf gathering dust. and when it could be used elsewhere in the organization to drive other profit-making activities and so forth. But there's also a component of this that has to do with hard carrying costs, actual out-of-pocket expense of that excess stock, right? I've got to pay sales tax on it, property taxes typically. I've got to pay insurance on that. It may be collateral against a loan, and I've got banks looking at that. It's taking up space in the warehouse. I've got to count it and move it around, so I've got labor costs associated with it. I may have it go obsolete or some other shrinkage, have it get broken, and so forth. So there's all kinds of costs that are very clear when I have too much inventory. So it's really about balancing those levels, right? How do I have enough but not too much? And that's really what that would kind of be the down and dirty way of thinking about what an optimized inventory is, right? There might be a textbook definition of an optimized inventory where I have the minimum amount of inventory on hand to meet my customer requirements. But it's really about that Goldilocks, having it just right, the Goldilocks theory. And then the third issue here with managing this is where we see challenges is just from a productivity standpoint. The folks on our teams that are responsible for managing those sort of competing interests, right? That having enough but not too much conundrum are spending an awful lot of time typically managing spreadsheets and running around putting out fires and getting yelled at by the sales guys and getting yelled at by the CFO for either running out or having too much on the books. And I'm really challenged at trying to be productive. And instead of spending my time at higher quality, higher level activities, such as working with my vendors, building those relationships, tweaking my transportation network to make sure that I'm maximizing my return on investment and minimizing my costs and so forth, building those other relationships. Those are higher value, actually more interesting, more fun and productive things for those folks to be doing than putting out fires all the time, getting yelled at and managing spreadsheets or whatever other inadequate tools they're trying to leverage. The fourth one that I've kind of alluded to might just be the concept of overall visibility, right? Do I really have an understanding of the nature, the health of my inventory is kind of the way that we think about it at Sage Inventory Advisors. So there are some real critical problems that impact profitability of our businesses, right? This inventory asset is absolutely critical to our organizations. It's what our businesses are all about, is managing this piece of it effectively as a key driver to my profitability. And obviously, the more profitable I am, the more I can grow, the more people I can employ, all the positive things that come out of growing my business from a profitable perspective all starts with, in many of our distribution, manufacturing, retail businesses, how do I handle this key asset? And trying to do it with gut feel or suboptimal tools is just really challenging and is going to limit our growth and our profitability. So really needs to be a priority to figure this out. And so our topic today really zeroes in on, let's identify some strategies, 3 key things that we could be looking at to help us achieve that greater result, right? So take a quick drink here. So the first strategy that we would argue is really to ditch the spreadsheet. Sometimes if you've seen us at when we used to do live events, and hopefully someday soon we'll be doing live events again. So if we're manning the booth at Sage Summit or different Sage Roadshow events and so forth, you might see us wearing a button with Sage Inventory Advisor and hashtag ditch the spreadsheets underneath it, right? So this has been kind of a mantra for us from the very beginning. 90% of our new customers that we acquire, this is what we're replacing, is a spreadsheet environment as opposed to some other sort of technology or tool. So this really becomes a key factor for us is, let's understand what are we doing with that spreadsheet, right? And we understand why it's so common. Obviously, the ease of use and availability of it's pretty much on everybody's desktop. There's so much familiarity with it. We can do a lot with it. Every firm probably has at least one, what I would call Excel wizard. Maybe you're that person in the organization. And so there's certainly a lot of power there and a lot of ability to build some very complex spreadsheets, worksheets, and so forth that help us do all sorts of analytics and math and that kind of thing. Great tool, no question about it. And so we understand why it's so prevalent and why it's often used for this purpose of inventory replenishment. And it can do some pretty amazing things. But we've actually done full webinars strictly on this topic. We've got a series of, I think, 3 or 4 blog posts that we did talking about the fallacies and the downfalls and the challenges of using a spreadsheet to try to do inventory replenishment in a kind of a best practices sort of way. And so we won't go that deep in it here today, but just to give you the feel that there are some clear challenges. First one is, what's my process for getting the data out of the ERP? One of the things we know about all ERPs, and Sage ERP is no exception, that we've got very well organized sets of tables and files and so forth that are well titled. We understand what they are. They're well structured. We've got data schema that tells us exactly what data is where. That's great, but we still have to have that data extracted and put into our spreadsheet environment. And so we have to make sure we're getting that right. Every time there's a new version of the software, am I making any adjustments? Are there things that are changing in the data tables that I now have to change my spreadsheet accordingly? The timing of the extraction of that data, right? If I'm bringing out certain tables now and then I get interrupted, I have to go to a meeting, and then I come back and I draw some more data out, and then I draw some more data out. So now I've populated my spreadsheet, but in the meantime, things have changed, right? That data is constantly being posted to and updated within the ERP environment. So now I've got synchronization and accuracy issues there. I've got to really make sure I've got that nailed. For some of our customers, that has meant, coming in on Saturday mornings when nobody else is on the system, or staying late at night one night. And so there's quality of life challenges with that approach, right? And that are unfortunate. And then there's the issue of, am I the only person in the organization? Is there 1 or 2 people in the company that even know how this all works, right? How do I do that extraction? Do I understand the formulas that are built into these complex spreadsheets? If you've ever picked up somebody else's spreadsheet, you know how challenging it is to understand. It's like picking up a programming language and understanding the flow and logic, making sure that there's no hidden errors. Sometimes the errors in spreadsheets, they pop up and we know right away we've got a formula problem. Sometimes not so obvious, right? It's just a bad cell that is not creating an error, but it's producing a bad calculation. So there's all kinds of challenges with the data side of it and the control side. But then there's also other additional inputs. Not everything we need to be able to do proper replenishment and forecasting and planning resides in the ERP. So I've got these additional inputs. And then what have I've got multiple locations and multiple warehouses and SKUs spread across, or I've got bills of materials where I'm creating finished goods or kits that have components underneath them. And am I exploding the demand for those component materials down to the lowest level? And then we know that as soon as we think we've got it nailed, life changes, right? If we haven't learned that in 2020, we're never going to learn it. These are very dynamic environments. Things are always changing, new processes, new procedures, like I say, new versions of software, and all kinds of other complications that come into play. So we won't, I won't beat a dead horse here and overstate this, but clearly the spreadsheet is not designed, right? It's a blank sheet that comes out that we have to build, and that's great. We can do some good things with it, but it's never going to get us to a best practice, to an absolute optimal environment. And we know that because when we talk to customers that are using spreadsheets to solve the problem, they still tell us they still have products that they're running out of, that they have products that they have way too much of, and it's taking way too much time to manage this whole environment to really get ahead of it. So if it's not solving the problem, then we know it's not the solution, right? And so spreadsheets is really a key first strategy. If as you're listening to this, if that's your approach, that you're attempting to use that tool, I give you lots of credit for all the hard work. And it's no doubt been better than pen and paper, and it's been an improvement from where you were, but it's not going to get you to the top, right? So take a close look at that. The second strategy that we would identify is the concept of classifying your items, categorizing your items, just understanding the nature of the items in your inventory so that you can manage them more effectively, right? Again, as we talk to the folks that are responsible for doing the planning and replenishment and purchasing in organizations, as we survey them and have conversations with them, the phrase we always hear is putting out fires. Sometimes we do some events where we have polling questions, right? We have people respond to the poll, and the number one response is always, here's my biggest challenges. I'm spending all my time putting out fires, right? Some variation of that theme. And so we would say that part of the solution to that is to be able to focus your time and energy on the items which are most important, right? How do I know which items mean the most to my company in terms of availability, profitability, movement, and so forth? Where do I need to spend my time and energy? Which items deserve the most attention? Which can be kind of set aside and sort of a set it and forget it policy, right? So that I can spend my time and energy, which we know is limited, right? Time is our most precious resource. We're all wearing multiple hats many times, especially in small, medium-sized businesses. This may be one of 3 or 4 different responsibilities I have in the organization. So my time is limited. So how do I make best use of my time and focus on the most important items within the organization? And so, you know, a good starting point is simply the Pareto Principle, right? The 80-20 rule almost always applies, and we can think about our item SKU and our classification of items in that way, really understanding the nature of the items. So which ones are most deserving of your attention? Which ones are faster moving versus slower moving? Which ones are the most valuable versus lowest value? You probably are familiar with the ABC sort of ranking, right? Where I rank my items in terms of value. So that's one way of doing this. But we also want to be thinking about that speed of movement. And one of the things that you also want to think about is getting the noise kind of out of the way, right? So if an item has been discontinued or obsoleted, I might still have it in inventory, but I don't want to do any planning around that, right? So keep that out of my view at this point. Or if it's an item that we have in our catalog, if you will, and we can sell it, but I don't stock it, then keep that out of my point of view, right? And just focus on items that are current, they're stocked, and then they're fast moving, high value items. That's where I want to focus my time and energy and be most cognizant of what's going on with those items and get ahead of any problems that are occurring there. And if you can really identify those bread and butter items, those high value, fast moving items that drive the most profit, then you're going to make smarter purchase decisions, right? Which is what this is all about. Those are the ones that I want to make sure I have set policies for that give me the best odds for preventing stocking out of those key items. And if you identify conversely the slower movers or lower margin items, you can make some decisions around that. If those are nuts and bolts that I need to have, as a component of the manufacturing process, they're low cost, buy them in as much bulk as I can, get the best price and put them in the corner of the warehouse and not worry about them. Maybe I replenish those twice a year, right? And so I don't have to spend a lot of time thinking about those. Other more important items, I want to be more nimble, buy them in smaller quantities, but more often, and get more turns out of those and so forth. So the point is, once you understand the nature of the items by your proper classification, you now can set policies and make decisions around how I manage those. And without that visibility and understanding, you just can't do that. And so that's a big help in getting you to that nirvana of an optimized inventory, right? And then the third strategy that we would focus on here today is really focusing on eliminating that excess stock, right? Understanding kind of that hidden danger that's out there that's costing me money that I may not even realize what the impact of that is. And I want to make sure that we have a clear understanding here that there's a difference between safety stock, or some things you might refer to as buffer stock, and what's truly excess, right? Because those do get confused sometimes when we're talking with folks. And so I want to be clear that excess stock is stock that's above and beyond that safety or buffer stock. Safety stock isn't really a level as much as it's a policy, right? It's intentional. This is a specific amount that I want to have in buffer to manage different risks that are that exist within my supply chain. It could be on the supply side, where my suppliers and vendors for those items create some risk for me if they're not performing at a consistently high level, right? I sometimes get product in too early or too late, or I get short shipped product from certain vendors. I need to know that best I can, and then accommodate that as a risk factor as I figure out what my safety stock needs to be, right? So that's an intentional policy-driven decision as to have this buffer to manage that risk. The risk could be on the demand side. If I've got a product that is seasonal demand or multiple seasons throughout a year, or has some other volatility associated with it, and therefore is hard to predict what future demand is, then that creates risk for me on the demand side of the cycle of the equation. And so I need to accommodate that risk by having some additional safety stock. So as I understand those things, I can have that policy, have a clear setting for what that buffer or safety stock needs to be. And then I know anything above and beyond that is what I would classify as excess. It's that extra inventory that you tend to pile up without policy. It just sort of happens, right? If you don't pay attention to it, you just overbuy and you think you're doing the right thing. All of a sudden you realize I've got hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars worth of excess inventory, tying up that cash. Again, envision the dollar bills or $1,000 bills sitting on the shelves in your warehouse gathering dust, right? And really impacting cash flow. And not only that, but there's sort of this multiplier effect. If you think about what you could be doing with that cash in the organization, instead of it sitting in the warehouse, it could be driving other profit creating activities within the organization, more marketing, hiring additional resources, research and development. We've got a success story, one of our customers that we talked to that freed up almost $1 million worth of cash out of about a $3.5 million inventory at the time. And with that cash, they were able to create 2 or 3 new products that helped them leapfrog their competition. Right. So, and what's the multiplier effect of that effective use of cash, right? It's huge. It was a game changer for the organization. So there's a lot to this that sometimes doesn't always meet the eye immediately. And so that's why it's one of our really key strategies. And we can do some quick math around it as we think about this in your organizations, right? Conservative estimates are, and what we always run into, are at least 10 or 20% of a company's inventory is typically in an excess status. Sometimes we've seen as much as 30-35% is not uncommon. But even for very conservative math here and return on investment sorts of calculations, let's assume you've got 10% of your inventory in an excess status. Let's also assume you've got, maybe for easy math, $1 million worth of inventory. I would say the bulk of our customers are somewhere between about $1 million, maybe $750,000, up to $5 million worth of inventory is probably the bell, the middle of the peak of the bell curve for us in terms of across our customer base. So that's not a bad number to leverage. So if I've got $1 million worth of inventory and 10% of that is in excess, that's $100,000 sitting on my warehouse, not doing my business any good, right? Tying up cash, costing me money, because of the carrying costs on that, anywhere from 18 to 20 or 22%, depending on who you talk to. Again, for easy math, let's use 20%. That's $20,000 a year in carrying costs to keep that excess stock on the shelves. So I've got hard costs that I'm writing checks for, right? And it's tying up working capital that could be used elsewhere to drive other profit-making activities. So think about that in your case. You have a feel for your organizations. Is it 1 million in inventory, 500,000, 5 million? What's your best guess as to what you think your excess number looks like? Is it 10%? Is that too conservative? Is it closer to 20, which I would probably guess is probably fair? And you can see how, if you do that real simple math, how that can really have an impact on the profitability of the organization, and something that can easily be managed. So how do you do that? I think we've actually got an ebook out on our website that gives you some tips, and we've done some other blog posts and so forth. But a couple of quick, easy steps. First, identify it, right? I've got to figure out where it is and what I have. So if I've got a spreadsheet now, go in and dig into that, understand that, do some math, do some analysis, and try to figure out how much do I actually have in excess. Then take some action against that, right? Whether that's put it on sale and try to sell it and get it off the shelves, maybe talk to my vendor if I can send it back to them, or sell to a competitor, maybe in another geography where you don't compete. But you can, send it to that other a competitor at 50 cents on the dollar, just get it off your books and out of your warehouse. Figure out some way, right? And again, if you classify those items, you can understand which one of them are fast movers. Maybe the ones that are fast movers, I don't have to put a fire sale out there. Normal attrition will get rid of that quickly enough for me. But if it's a slow mover, I really want to take some action. So these things all kind of work together, right? So that classifying of my excess really helps me make some decisions as to what actions I take to alleviate that excess. But then we also want to say, okay, if we solve the problem for the snapshot that we're currently in, I want to prevent the problem from reoccurring. So let's take a look at this concept that we call a surplus order. Where do I have purchase orders for those items that are already established as being in excess that are going to come in and create more excess? It doesn't do me any good to get rid of a bunch of stuff and then have more coming in the door that I don't need yet. So first action what you have, and then prevent the problem from reoccurring by really understanding what you've got out there in purchase orders. Make sure that you understand what that replenishment cycle needs to look like. Maybe I need to tighten up my forecast and so forth so that I can prevent that surplus from reoccurring. And then the fourth aspect of this is now to take a look at what that safety stock or buffer stock policy really needs to be for those items, right? If this is a notorious item that's constantly in that excess status, I've got a recurring issue there. I need to understand, what are my risks? What does my safety buffer stock really need to be? Right? Can I manage my vendors a little bit better to manage the supply side risk? Can I do a better job of understanding the forecasting? If I'm trusting my sales team to give me my forecast and they are notoriously optimistic, like as sales folks tend to be, then I want to temper that, give me that, but then I'm going to apply an 80% number to that, and that becomes my real demand, and now that factors into my safety stock. So you have to be thinking about what those issues are so that I can get a tighter, better safety stock policy. And if we do those things consistently, and again, focus on the most important items, then we're going to have the biggest impact on our profitability and improving our cash flow and so forth. So all of this stuff kind of works together. So, so 3 key strategies there, right? Ditch the spreadsheet, get a better tool. Secondly, classify those items, really understand. We've got somebody on our team that likes to use the phrase, know who's who in the zoo, right? And especially if you've got lots of locations and lots of SKUs, the more challenging that is. And so you've really got to get your arms around those classification challenges, and then really focus on actioning that excess stock and getting that stuff cleared out. And so what it really comes down to is optimal inventory is driven by optimal orders. You've got to be buying smarter. You've got to creating orders that are correct and accurate and make sense and are based on analysis, not gut feel, that has some history and an understanding, some technology calculations behind them, so that you can stay ahead of this curve. So you really need a tool, we would argue, a replenishment tool that gives you that better visibility, helps you create those dynamic, always changing, ever changing, reacting to changes in the environment, safety stock levels, looking at those forecasts, applying smart forecasts with an ability to adjust, and therefore improving your fill rates with your customers, your customer sat, customer retention, and therefore profitability. And then having something that does that all by leveraging the incredible data that's stored in the Sage ERP that you're already leveraging, right? So you'll know you found the right tool if it checks those boxes, right? And it works in sync with your ERP. But even the right tool from a technical perspective may not be ideal if, one, it's too difficult to deploy, right? It's too challenging to get up and running, or it's too expensive. It just doesn't make ROI common sense to your organization. So, there are some great tools out there, but they're really complicated and very expensive that the big firms, large enterprises have been using for years. Probably not appropriate for a middle market, small, medium-sized type business, which typically is a Sage ERP type customer, right? And then the third challenge is just change management, right? It's not going to work if your team's not fully on board. You really need to have executive sponsorship from the top down, and you got to have buy-in from the bottom up, so that everybody in the organization is really on the same page and see the value of making this adjustment. And if you're the person that wrote that elaborate spreadsheet, You know, I understand there's a certain pride of ownership, and there should be. I mean, that took a lot of blood, sweat, and tears to create that master spreadsheet that is the tool that's being used now. But it also takes some, you know, honesty, some reflection that says, yeah, this was a great step, but it's not going to ever get me to full best practices type of environment, right? It's never going to meet the levels that we really could. And if there's a better way, I'm open to it, right? And that's what we would have that conversation with you about, that maybe there's a better way. And I think in the case of change management and coming to those kinds of conclusions, I would advise you to really trust your relationship with SWK. We've got lots of common customers. They have a ton of experience, right? They're a large player, very well respected. They've got a lot of experience and depth of knowledge and understanding. Leverage your relationship with SWK to help with that piece of it, right? Set those goals. If we make this investment, what is our expectation? Do we want to get to this level of inventory fulfillment, and what are the metrics and the targets that we're reaching for? And then help me measure those, right? Give that report back to the executive team. Say, here's why we're making this investment, because I want to hit these performance levels, and then monitor it at 3 months and 6 months and a year later. Did we achieve the goal that we originally had in mind when we made the investment in a better tool? And SWK can really help you in that whole aspect of it, which then drives more adoption of the product and continued existing use and getting more and more use out of the power of the tool. So leverage that. So what's the Sage Inventory Advisor approach, right? We built an application over 10 years ago now that was designed specifically for the middle market. The founders of NetStock, the authors of Inventory Advisor, all come from large enterprise, global, you know, multinational type of supply chain environments, very complex, very customized. So the domain knowledge within our team is very deep, very long. Decades of experience combined in our team. And they came together and saw that there was an opportunity for small, medium-sized businesses that now had just as much challenge in their supply chains, buying from overseas with long lead times, trying to optimize those transportation costs, selling omni-channel environments, right? Selling direct, maybe online, maybe through other online stores, maybe using 3PLs to get distribution coverage across the country, so forth. So there's all this complexity, and they didn't have tools that were affordable or usable that made sense for them, so they were stuck with those spreadsheets. So we saw the opportunity, built an application, and said, okay, cloud is the way to do this, right? Make this tool browser-based, so it's available anywhere, anytime on demand in any browser. Build those integrations with the different ERPs, Sage ERP, as well as Acumatica and some others that we've built certified, tested, bulletproof type connections with, that automatically every single night go grab all the data that's necessary, put away all those problems relative to control and syncing and accuracy and so forth. It's all done. And then take all that raw data and return it back as actionable information in a dashboard environment that's easy to understand. It's graphical, colorful, uses lots of visual cues, very interactive for the user, very easy to adapt to and get up and running, and supports that management by exception sort of model, right? Help bubble up for me which items are most important for me to pay attention to today, right now. I've got an hour to solve a problem. Show me which problem I should solve, right? And help me focus my energy and attention and give me direction and recommendation on what I can do to solve that. And then have that be, again, because of the cloud model, very rapidly deployed, all done remotely and done affordably through a subscription sort of model. So that's what we did when we built the application. That was the goal. And again, as I mentioned, we've got now well over 1,600 firms globally, well over 800 of those, more than half of those in North America alone. You know, probably putting out 20, 30 new ones a month. And, you know, actually, ironically, one of the impacts of the COVID disruptions is that we've never been busier, right? I mean, think about it. Here we are, a supply chain application that is cloud-based. So I don't even have to be in that office when we're all remotely working these days. And it's a tool that can be deployed remotely. So we've actually never been busier. And the customers that were already on board before this hit have told us repeatedly how fortunate they were that they had this tool in place before the severe disruption hit, so that they could manage it and be nimble enough to adapt to the volatility that was going on in the marketplace. So rather than get into a live demo, just to wrap it up here over the next couple of minutes, and then we'll open it up for questions. But I thought I'd just give you a couple of quick screenshots to give you a sense for what the interface looks like. And then obviously more than happy that if this piqued your interest at all, more than happy to have a deeper conversation, learn more about your particular needs and see if we're a fit and we have something to talk further about. But so the dashboard here, this is 6 of the 9 widgets or KPIs that we present on the standard dashboard, where we can give you a feel for, you know, what's that current snapshot, right? What's that health check of where I currently stand? Top row tends to be more stock oriented. What's my current level versus my ideal model? And how am I doing in achieving, getting closer and closer to that ideal? How much of that is specifically in excess? Again, above and beyond the safety stock and the max number that we want for that item at any point in time, that's the excess. Help me understand what that big picture looks like. And then the third column, surplus orders, those POs that I mentioned that we don't need yet, right? That are on their way in and going to create more of an excess problem. So help me get ahead of the curve with those and be more proactive. And not only show me that macro view and show me that timeline over the last 12 periods as to how I'm trending, but then help me either drill into that big view or show me the top 5 items within each of those different categories or KPIs or measurements that are contributing the most to that particular condition. And then even within that, help me prioritize which ones I want to take a look at through other visual cues and color coding and so forth. So that top row tends to be more stock oriented. The second row I would say is more customer oriented. How am I doing in fulfilling my target fill rate? And how is that trending over time? Where am I currently stocked out, and how much is that potentially costing me in lost sales based on the demand profile for those items? And then in the third column, again, a little more proactive, forward thinking, where do I have product now that's in stock, but we're projecting is likely to run out of stock before the next replenishment arrives? So I can, again, get ahead of the curve, expedite an order, maybe air freight some of the product to solve that problem before it actually occurs. So, so a really good health check with all kinds of visual cues and help and understanding where do I have a challenge that I need to focus on. The way we address that classification issue is kind of exemplified here, where we take a look in a given warehouse, real or virtual. We're going to classify all the items, removing obsolete items and non-stocked items, focus on those stocked items and rank them in 2 different ways. ABC ranking in terms of value, and then low, medium, high ranking in terms of speed of movement or velocity. And so the combined view of those produces this matrix, and in the upper right corner there in color-coded green, high value, fast moving items, bread and butter items, right? That I maybe want to have different policies associated with those, higher target fill rates, different replenishment cycles, things that I want to do to take action around those items. And you'll notice then that color coding is what shows up on this dashboard. So if I look at my potential stock outs in the lower right corner here, I can see of my top 5 list, the bottom 3 are color coded green. Those are bread and butter items that I really want to solve and take care of and focus on first. If I've got limited time in my day, those are the ones I want to target and try to tackle those problems first. Lower left corner in the red, slow moving, low value items. Again, if those are nuts and bolts, maybe I buy them twice a year, put them in the corner of the warehouse. Or maybe I wonder why I even bother stocking some of them, right? Maybe I can rationalize that a little bit, see if I've got a vendor that I can trust locally to maybe manage that stock for me and have more of a just-in-time sort of approach for those items. Point is, the visibility gives me the ability to make decisions and set policy accordingly. This is a view of our forecasting from a kind of a bottom-up view, an individual item. We can see what the historical consumption of this item has been, whether it was in a sale or as part of a bill of material. And then we look at that pattern, we test it against our 15 or 16 different algorithms, and we produce a forecast that is the best fitting prediction of the future and for the next 12 months, with the ability for the demand planner, replenishment person to make some changes, right? If I know something that the algorithms wouldn't be aware of, we just signed a big contract or we just lost a big customer, I can make those manual adjustments to that forecast view and then have that impact what my buying recommendations need to be. And last screen, speaking of buying recommendations, this is the screen that would pop up within Sage Inventory Advisor, and we say, okay, I'm ready to make a purchase against vendor 123. Shows me all the items that are eligible, that need to be purchased from that vendor, and then all the logic behind it, all the reasonings as to why it's showing up on a recommended purchase, what the recommended purchase actually is, the quantity, does the math for me, shows me what that pro forma PO would look like. Everything is at my fingertips to make sure that I understand why that's the recommendation. I can make adjustments and override the recommendations. And when I get it the way I want, kind of in this workspace, worksheet sort of environment, very quickly can come to a conclusion, yep, that's my optimal purchase order for this supplier right now, today. Click a button, it goes and creates the open PO for me back in the Sage ERP. So very efficient way to get to create a perfect PO in minutes, maybe worst case a couple of hours, depending on how complicated the environment is, how many items there are, as opposed to what used to be days or weeks in some cases. So huge time savings and much better result. So with that, I'll wrap it up and send it back over to you, Jolene, but open it up for questions if there are any. Happy to answer those. My contact information is there on the screen. You can see my email address. Also, there's a website that I would recommend you go to, inventoryadvisor.co. Certainly, we have content out on the Sage website as well, but of course, that's kind of a monster. There's 500,000 pages on the Sage ERP website. So this might be a little bit easier for you to navigate to and get some specific information. And then obviously talk to your account manager at SWK. They can work with you as well and get in touch with me if appropriate. So happy to have a further conversation. Jolene, with that, turn it back over to you, see if there's any questions before we conclude for the day.
Thanks, Russ. We'll now open it up for questions. If you have any questions, please enter them into the question section of your GoToWebinar. We'll give that a minute in case any come through. And just to remind everyone, we do have a subject matter expert here. This is a great opportunity to have your questions answered in real time. And we do have a couple that came through during the presentation, Russ. The first is, of the 3 strategies mentioned, which is the most crucial for a manufacturer in your opinion?
That's a great question. Which is most crucial? Yeah, and I think one of the points that I tried to make in going through that is that they all kind of play together nicely, right? I can impact one by having better classification and so forth, and really working through the excess by understanding the nature of the items. But I think probably if I had to rank one, the most critical thing is if you're trying to manage things with the spreadsheet, that's to me is the obvious one. You just have to get better technology. We do a webinar content sometimes that talks about kind of a best practices approach, and that's sort of an umbrella approach, right? And we think about this, and I kind of alluded to in one of the earlier slides, there's really 3 key pieces. There's people, processes, and technology, and you really need to have all 3 to achieve a best practice environment. And again, this pandemic has again exposed some of the weaknesses in our environment, but more often than not, a lot of it starts with the right technology. Of course, that's my orientation as a software guy anyway, but it also still has to be with the people buying into the process and understanding it, and then having proper processes, right? Which is a great role for SWK to play to make sure that the flow of information, the internal documentation and decisions and processes of how I receive purchase orders, how those are allocated, where they're stored in the warehouse, all that stuff all has to work in union. But a good proper technology can support best practices with the people and the processes. So I think my tendency and my bias, I guess, would be to start with getting better technology and ditching the spreadsheets.
Great. We have another. Which ERPs does your product integrate with?
Yeah, on the Sage side, it's the Sage 100, 300, 500, and X3 in North America, right? There's other Sage ERPs in different regions around the world. The UK, they call them Line 100 and Line 200, I think. And in South Africa where we are, there's a couple of different tools. So all those different Sage ERPs that we connect to, also Acumatica, and probably about 35 others that we have built integrations to now. And that piece of it's actually not the complicated part. The magic of what we're doing is not really in the integration so much. It just kind of works and it's basic. But once we have the data extracted from the ERP, that's where our kind of secret sauce is right? How we analyze that data and produce metrics and targets and visibility for users to really know where to spend their time.
Great. And we have another, what does implementation look like?
Yeah, great question. As I mentioned, it's all done remotely. We've actually built a very mature methodology because of our experience of doing so many a month and over the years, right? So we've literally been through hundreds and hundreds of iterations. So we have a very solid methodology. It's really a 5-step process. First couple steps are pretty straightforward, right? We install, we get that first dashboard, we do some sanity checking and so forth to make sure we're getting all the data and all that looks right. And then the bulk of the effort really is on what we call the refinement stage, where we work with someone in the organization that really understands the inventory and the marketplace that you're in. And we make some decisions in terms of configuration and parameters and how we want to view it. Are there user-defined fields or custom groupings that make sense for your organization and how you think about your inventory, and get that all configured and tested. And then we roll it out to the rest of the users through a learning and a support phase and a training process then. So it's a pretty solid methodology. A typical distribution company, we would expect to be up and running in 6 weeks or so. Depending on some factors, but that's a pretty typical onboarding timeline. We've done them as fast as 2 weeks, but everybody's got lots going on in their businesses, got other work to do. So good expectations, maybe 6 to 8 weeks to get it up and running, fully onboarded.
Perfect.
Those are good questions.
Great. Thank you so much, Russ, for your informative presentation and for taking the time to be here today. For more information on Sage Inventory Advisor, check out our website at swktech.com and click on Inventory Advisor under the Warehouse Management section in the Products tab. Thank you everyone for attending our webinar. Have a wonderful rest of the day.
Thanks, everyone.